62, I'm just gonna pretend I can't hear you anymore.
My most frequently asked question is how am I aging these pages? I've done a mini tutorial before, but I want to go more into depth. So my preferred medium is gouache. What's gouache? I don't know. Glorified watercolors. And the brand I like to use is called Hemi.
I'm not paying $44 for that.
Is it pricey? Yeah, I don't know why it costs that much.
But man, is it a good product.
So the first color I'm gonna grab is called ochre. It's like a reddish brown, earth yellow,
Technically, they're all earth colors.
primrose, very misleading title, oriental red,
Sounds like a slur.
black, and burnt umber. Now in real life, I don't call them these colors. They're all the same color to me anyways.
If I catch anyone calling it primrose, I'm gonna show up in your room at 3 a.m.
So there's a lot of brushes that you can use. Typically I use the smaller brushes, but for the demonstration I'm gonna go ahead and use the bigger brush. So the first thing I do is I always add a little bit of water just to reactivate my paint.
Don't forget about primrose, it's yellow.
Afterwards, I like to add a little bit of plain water to my plate before adding any color. So when we start aging the page, we're gonna have to do this in multiple layers. So for my first layer, I'm gonna go ahead and grab that reddish brown, a little bit of that dark brown, and some of that yellow. This is gonna give me a really good foundation to work with. And I'm just aiming for like a coffee-ish color. If this is the first time you do this technique, I want you to go ahead and wet the entire page with clean water. And it is okay if the water has a little pigment in it. That won't cause too much of an issue. Now the reason I ask you to do that is because it's going to make spreading the ink a lot easier. If you work on a dry surface, this does tend to be a little bit more difficult and a little less forgiving, but with practice you can go ahead and skip this step. So in my particular case right here, I already have a page that's already dirtied on one side, and I want to make sure that the two match. So I'm going to be heavily focusing on the left side of my page, just so that I can have a really nice transition between the two. And don't be afraid to add in a lot of color. A lot of this is going to lighten up once we start drying it. You can experiment with all different combinations of these colors, and right here I'm going to be adding a little bit of yellow to this page just so I can have a little more texture going on. Now this yellow does seem like it's on really thick, but this is going to almost become transparent once it starts drying. And because I'm having a hard time blending in these colors with a bigger brush, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a smaller one. Now, while the page is still wet, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of a splatter pattern, and I'm doing it while the page is still wet so that my textures can have different opacity levels. And I'm going to be repeating this technique later down when the page is dried so that I can have the same texture but a little bit darker. If you find that the splatters are a little too dark, go ahead and feather them out with a little bit of clean water. And that finishes up our first layer, and you can see we have a nice different variety of colors going on here. So using a regular hairdryer, let's go ahead and dry this page and make sure to focus on all the edges and corners as this holds the most moisture and will take longer to dry. Now comparing the before and after, we can see just how much those colors have lightened up. So for the second round, we're going to continue adding on layers. And again, I am going to be focusing on that left side of the page because that's where I need the colors to be the darkest. And so that we don't have such a harsh line right here, I'm going to go ahead and use some clean water to help feather that out. So this is something I want to bring your attention to. You see these little particles right here? That's happening because as we're adding colors, we're actually stripping away the fibers of the page. And if you do this too much, you might accidentally rip the page. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're adding your colors. If you want to have that burned corner look, it's actually not too difficult. We're going to start off by wetting the page and then coming back around with a little bit of black, and we're just going to scrape that edge. Make sure not to use too much black because that does become overpowering quickly. A little will go a long way, and we can just feather that out with some water. To help transition it, we're going to go ahead and get some of that dark brown, and we're just going to go right over it a second time. This will just help make it look a little more subtle. Right here is another example of those particles, and that's a clear sign telling me that I'm overworking this corner. For those hard yellow stains, you want to make sure you have a lot of pigment on your brush, and you want to feather this out as little as possible, meaning don't touch the center, but just try to work on the corners. This will help give you a really subtle yellow look. And feel free to leave dry areas. This will add extra texture. And we can see the second layer is looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and add our final layer. The final layer is going to have all the darkest colors. So to start, I'm going to add extra splatters here, and then any of the splatters that I find that are too dark, I'm just going to come back around and feather that out. And don't get fooled by the clean water. It does look like it's adding color to the page, but it's really not. And so now we can really focus on that left side and make sure those two match. So using the dark brown and a little bit of black, I'm going to blend in a color that looks very similar to that previous page. This way I can have the two pages look like they're a matching set and not two separate individual drawings. And let's make sure to get that bottom corner as well. And sometimes those colors don't fully blend out, and you can easily just add a little more water just to feather it out. Do make sure to do this before it's fully dry though, as once it's dry, it's kind of locked in. And there we go. Now we have a page that's really nicely aged. Usually at this point, I'm just scraping off all the extra fibers, and that comes off pretty easily. And if we take a closer look, we can see we have really nice stains, darker corners, a nice transition between the two pages. And in the top right, we have a burned corner. And there's a lot of texture around this page that makes it really interesting to look at. But let's say you don't have any gouache paint to work with. That's not a problem. I have a couple alternatives for you. Let's go ahead and find a nice page in our spare journal to work with. We're going to make a couple examples here. Example 1, I'm going to go ahead and use this really cheap watercolor set. And these were the colors that I used to use before I bought my gouache set. And we have a nice variety of colors to work with. So starting off with some clean water, let's go ahead and activate all the paints. And this is very similar to gouache. You're just going to be adding a little bit of water just to reactivate the color. Let's add some brown, some yellow, some reds, and a little bit of black, just to darken up that brown a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and just start applying that to the page. And we're going to work with this the exact same way. I'm only going to be doing one layer for the example, but adding multiple layers, you can get deeper colors, and you can get really nice crispy textures. You can even get those yellow stain colors, and you can even get those darker edges, almost exactly the same way as gouache. The burned edges aren't going to look as nice, but you can still work with this. And that's our first layer, and that's looking pretty good already. But let's say you don't have access to watercolors. That's okay, we can use acrylics. If you get a little bit of water in a cup and then you go ahead and add your acrylic, you can really dilute the color and make a really nice stain to work with. These aren't necessarily the perfect colors to use, but this will work for the example. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. The more ink you use, the darker it's going to be. The more water you add, the lighter it's going to look. Just make sure you don't have it sit there for too long. You can see I accidentally let it sit for a couple seconds too long, and then I had to do extra steps to make it blend in better. This is why I recommend having the page already wet to begin with, because you won't run into these issues. Here I'm going to be adding a little bit more pigment just so I can have a little bit darker stains. And then to get harsher stains, don't add any water at all. Just go straight from ink to page. But let's say you don't want to work with acrylics, but you do have instant coffee. You'd be surprised how well this works. You can even use tea as an alternative. And this works exactly the same. The more you add, the darker it'll be. And here's an instant coffee trick only. If you grab some of the grains and crush them up in your fingers, you can go ahead and spread that on while the page is still wet, and that ink will end up spreading out and giving you a really nice texture that's very unique to just using coffee. You can even use something like wood stain. Just dilute it the same way, and then you can go ahead and start adding that onto the page. This isn't going to be the best stain, but it does work. And really the possibilities are endless. You could use shoe polish, airbrush ink, leather paints, tattoo ink, although be careful with that one because that one will go through the page. And if you're going to use something like oil paints, I wouldn't mix this one with water. I would use something like liquid or linseed oil. And do make sure you shake the bottle beforehand. It's not supposed to look like oil, it's supposed to come out like the consistency of honey. And for the paint, you don't need too much. Very little goes a long way. And this is going to work exactly how we use the water. The more liquid you use, the lighter it's going to be, and the more pigment you add, the darker it's going to be. The only downside I would say that oil paints have is the dry time is significantly longer. If you use something like liquid, you do cut down that time to around 12 hours, but that is still a long time. And then once we hit it with the hairdryer, we can see what the colors are actually going to look like. And you can see, just like the gouache paint, a lot of these did lighten up. And this is not exclusive to this paper type only. You can use any type of paper. Here's a sheet of computer paper, and I'm going to use the coffee technique on this one, and you can see it looks exactly the same. This paper is a little more delicate and does wrinkle easy, but you can make this work. Although I will make this comment. If you're going to use pure white paper, make sure to cover the entire surface area. If you only add pigment to little small areas, you end up getting this weird little patchy look. And in my opinion, it doesn't quite look as good. But if that's the look you're looking for, then by all means. If you find that there are areas that you don't really like, you can always add on more. This will help hide all those little patchy areas. And feel free to mix and match. Right here I'm going to be adding gouache paint for the second layer, and that's going to help hide all those little patchy areas. And you can see the two type of pigments blend in perfectly fine. And if you add too much, you can easily remove it with a tissue. If there are any other techniques you want to learn, by all means let me know, and I'll be more than happy to record that. I have the unhealthy habit of glossing over a lot of techniques. And you can see none of these paints actually bled over to the opposite page. Very beginner friendly.